All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. If you are just joining, go ahead and put your name in the chat and where you're tuning in from. Would love to hear from you, and hopefully, we'll get a lot of traction here and get some good questions for our special guest today. So, welcome everyone to the CubeSkills community, coming at you on YouTube and Twitch actually today. Dual
Nice.
So February 8th. So what is CubeSkills? CubeSkills is a community for everyone where you can join and collaborate with hundreds. We got maybe 200 plus members now, all happy to collaborate and join and learn the complexities of containers and Kubernetes. And today, open source. As you know, Kubernetes is an open source project. So we're joined by Brian Douglas today. He is, promoting and a member, founder, of.
Yeah, I'm a member as well.
Yeah, a member and founder, and all around. Sorry, just trying to put in the chat as I talk here. Not as talented as I'm usually am. So this is the one I want to put on the screen here, which is opensauce.pizza. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, he's helping engineers get discovered through their open source contributions. Open Sauce Pizza. I love that name. Helping developers find ways to contribute to open source, and that's really the topic of our discussion today, which I'm really excited to get into. So he's also previously a member of developer relations at GitHub. Is that right?
Yep. It's been almost 5 years there.
Cool. Yeah, and then also you worked for Netlify as a developer advocate as well, right?
Yep. I started as a full stack engineer, and that's when I first got my first exposure to Kubernetes, actually.
Cool.
But left as the developer experience engineer.
Cool. So he's B Dougie on GitHub. I'd like to shed some light on this particular repo of awesome Black developers. Let me put that in the chat and highlight that for a second. So go to github.com/bdougie/awesome Black developers. All these awesome developers are doing talks, blog posts, interviews, and just we want to take a minute today to amplify the voices of Black developers because Black lives matter.
Yeah.
So
true.
Yeah, and so he Brian says he gets a lot of enjoyment out of encouraging folks to get involved with open source through open source, obviously, and so he's B Dougie Yo on Twitter. Let's highlight that for a second. So go check out his posts over there, and then he's you have a pinned tweet on there. Surveying 50 plus contributors and maintainers and discovering the secrets to getting a good first issue. So hopefully he'll reveal some of those secrets today. So Brian Douglas, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time today, my friend. It's really good to have you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Yeah, thanks for reaching out. I like sharing my story and talking to folks and giving exposure to things like open source. Like I don't know if we do like a quick intro of my background as well. In addition to what you mentioned, like I was a career switcher. Like I got a finance degree in 2008 and then could not get a job because of the downturn in the market at that point in recession. And so ended up doing sales, IT sales for like 4 years, but got tired of that, taught myself how to write code because I had an idea for an app. And I'm here because of open source. Like if people did not put themselves out there and like write blog posts and answer Stack Overflow questions, I wouldn't have been able to teach myself on how to build an application. So that's why I'm here, and that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I'm really interested to hear your story and how you first got into open source? What was your first issue, if you can remember?
Yeah, I do remember. So my first issue, like if you go to good or firstpr.me, I think that is actually pullrequest.me. I don't know what the URL is, but folks probably could drop it in the chat and find that. But what I'm getting at is the first thing I did was I joined the Odin community. So part of open source, like the Odin project, was like this massive online curriculum, kind of like Free Code Camp. It was actually slightly before Free Code Camp, to be honest. The Odin project was acquired, like ended up absorbing into Thinkful, which is a online boot camp. But in order to like add extra stuff to the curriculum or answer questions, you would just commit some README or some Markdown. So my first contribution was like set up a weekly Ruby group and a time that we would meet to talk about code with random people on the internet. And that's why I learned the sort of magic of there are other people out there that want to learn code just like me, or maybe have done this or maybe a year or two ahead of me. And that was like the most rewarding experiences, is like doing a PR to a Markdown file on GitHub. But fast forward, like my actual code contribution, because like there's not really a big difference between code contributions and like documentation, but in the sense of GitHub. But I actually was building a Node script. Had never wrote any sort of server-side JavaScript, so I just learned that was a thing because I was only like a jQuery JavaScript in the browser person. So back like 2013, and found a way to solve a problem running a script on a server, a long time server, and did it in Node. And I found a library on GitHub that could solve that problem for me. So I reached out to the maintainer, and they kind of unblocked me on like some of my problems. And that contribution was like fixing the scripts to get it to run locally. It was broken, and there was like this, you had to add like a quick flag. So I added that, and that was my my next contribution. So about a year apart between the two.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are curious about how to find their first issue, and I think overall it's just a little bit overwhelming. I know I've felt that way as well. What would you say to somebody who's maybe new to open source and trying to, feeling the overwhelm, right, and trying to, search for how they can contribute?
Yeah, is it possible for me to share my screen? Because I just wrote a whole blog post on this, so I wanted to shed some light to that.
Yeah, definitely. Please.
I know we didn't actually practice this before, but
right.
I've used what is it, StreamYard before?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So on the open source landing page, opensauce.pizza, there's a blog, and like this one, it's good first issues don't exist. And it's more of like a clickbaity thing. We did a whole Twitter space series, like 3 Twitter spaces in a week, to talk about this concept of like finding good first issues. So you're more than welcome to like go listen to those. I think the Twitter space is still, it's still live. It'll be out there. But to find good first issues, the real secret sauce, the trick, is opening issues, because usually like we have all these like open source guide, or which was built by GitHub, or these good first issues.dev. Like these are all tools to find issues and source them. But the challenge is that like if you don't know how to use the project, it's going to be very hard to try to fix problems or good first issues. And like we have to have the baseline of, have you used this project? Have you installed it? Have you tried it somewhere else? Like that context is pretty needed to solve good first issues. So my pitch is use the project. And if you could use it, or if you can't use it, that's a good first issue. Like set us some, like my second contribution was fix the script that was broken. Like I thought I was smart enough after a year of professionally coding that I could use a library on GitHub, and I got blocked like pretty quickly trying to use this thing. So my inclination is like, hey, let me just ask to see if I can get unblocked by just asking the person who created it. And that turned into my good first issue for that project. It says, hey, add this flag and you're good to go. And everyone after me was out unblocked. So step one, if you're looking for a project, use a project first. So like leverage the stuff that you're using already. If you build stuff on, so if you're using this kubeskills, but like there's so many other tools that help the sort of DevOps pipeline, the tool chain. There's like really awesome things like small side projects. I've recently I was chatting about this, and I'll struggle to find this, but there's another YouTuber called Trash Dev, and he did sort of getting started to into open source video. And one of the things that I really liked about that video is that he said look for growth projects. And like growth project sounds weird, but like projects that are in their growth stage. So they get like 50 stars in one day. So like they've built a project, there's some sort of momentum there. And those are the projects that really need the help. Because like they're getting a lot of attention. Tons of stuff is probably broken because they didn't expect to solve this problem and that problem for this person. And at that moment, when things are sort of trending for them, is when they need the most help, and that's when people are using it the most. And the inclination for most devs is like, I'm going to use a project. If it doesn't work, I'll just move on. But the best thing you do is like don't move on. Like document what's broken, and that's your good first issue.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's funny you mentioned that because I am at Civo Navigate right now, which is a conference. Civo is a small cloud provider. They specialize in Kubernetes and cloud native technologies. And so they're having this conference, and there's a lot of those smaller companies that really need the love, right? And a lot of people are just starting off their project on GitHub and looking for contributors. And so yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we focus on Kubernetes a lot, obviously, but Kubernetes is a huge project, and we've seen 2,000 plus issues and PRs submitted per month. So it's that can be a little intimidating in itself. So start small, right? I think is the message there. So start small in terms of the project that you're supporting, and also it could be changing a line in their documentation, or it could be something as small as adding one line. It doesn't have to be a huge contribution, right?
Yeah, that is a thing that like currently we're going through. We have a bug. Well, I don't even know if it's a bug. We're trying to understand certain contributors. Their local development is not working. Everyone else is working, theirs is not. So like we're trying to figure out like what's going on in the Discord, and that becomes like there's probably something going on in their local environment they haven't disclosed. Like maybe they're using a weird Linux distro, or maybe they installed something that's blocking one of the npm processes. But like as we discover this, like whatever that solution is, like we have docs at OpenSauce.pizza pointing that solution to the docs and be like, hey, here's a frequently asked questions. We can unblock you if you're using this, and this, or maybe if you're holding it sideways and using it this way in this situation. Like those are all opportunity for us to like improve the developer experience for the next person. And I think we get a lot of contributors outside the US and have interesting like setups and machines, or maybe they're using Bard computers, like all that stuff. And like they might use a cloud environment. Like a lot of folks who just only code in cloud because of the limitation of their hardware. Like that's all stuff that it's for me. I'm sort of benefited being in the US and getting gifted a M1 MacBook Pro 16-inch from GitHub when I left. So like I don't think about, oh, what if you don't have the most beefiest computer to run these random scripts to get this thing up and running? And that's always good. It's good questions to ask, so that way we can now see our blind spots.
Yeah. And I also want to point out that it doesn't have to be a technical contribution either, right? Like we were talking about documentation. Like I don't think I don't think a lot of people know this, that you don't have to be a developer to contribute, right? You can contribute to documentation or any other form of making that developer experience better. So
yeah,
I did find that that
first timers only.
Yeah, firsttimersonly.com. If this is literally your first time contributing, I would encourage you to check out how to go through the process of submitting finding an issue, opening a PR, and then having that PR accepted.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring up too as well, there's someone who I got connected with during 2020 when pandemic. It was a boot camp student. They were doing the Lando school, And what impressed me about this person and why we ended up connecting and staying connected is they were, again, a boot camp student, but their sort of first contribution to most projects were always blog posts. So it's like first look at this, first look at that. And they created a series because they were brand new. So like their first look was always going to be a beginner's touch. And like there's not enough beginner content out there. Like if you ever tried to do anything in cloud development or front-end development or even API development, like everyone's a beginner when you start something new. And he became the beginner expert of like, I'm going to try to learn this thing and poke holes at the onboarding experience. Because like I think we just had something today in our team come up where our release process, like it's documented, but it's not. Like we use a process for semantic release that's documented in their documentation, but it's not documented ours. So any new contributor that comes through, it's like, hey, okay, my work here is done. Big, oh, well, actually, we do semantic release. You got to do this, this, and this. But it's not. It was like a blind spot for us because like everyone who worked on the project up until today we just knew. Like we knew how that worked, but we didn't know we didn't have the foresight of like, oh, let's document this for people who don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. As you get deeper in the weeds, you start to lose that awareness of a beginner. And I've experienced it myself being an engineer where, I know how this particular thing is built, starting from square one, or even, in the KubeSkills community where we have a plethora of different people starting at different stages, right? So if I jump in and start talking about stateful sets and how to set one up and how to, set up your persistent storage, some people are going to be lost because they're like, what is this terminology, and what are you even talking about? And you lose people that way. So I can't think of any other examples, but that happens so much where you lose that beginner's mindset.
Yep, 100%. Like it is something I struggle with because I don't feel myself. I guess I would consider myself a senior engineer, but like I forget what it took for me to get to this point. Like you wake up one day 10 years later, and you're like, oh, I guess I do know what I'm talking about. I do know how to get a PR merge. But it's like, it's one of those things that you don't realize. You're like, the question that I used to ask all the time is like, am I senior ready? And like, you don't know until someone tells you are. But then that same sort of process is like, you forget that, oh yeah, I don't know what it's like to be a beginner because it was so long for me. So like whenever I touch any sort of backend or infrastructure stuff, like I feel very beginner because I spent so much time on the front end working in that experience that I just made a decision in my career. Okay, I'm going to learn JavaScript better. But now I'm like, oh man, I don't know. Like, what's the command to what do you call it? Unlink. Anyway, that I was doing a bunch of Docker stuff last summer, and I had to like Google everything because I'm like, I don't. It's like one of those things that when it works, it just works. And like, if you don't have to think about it, you're good. But then when something is broken, you're like, oh, okay, let me dig into these documentation again.
Yeah, it's so interesting how that happens. We do have a question from the chat here. So Carlton's asking, how do you get contributions noticed? Like, that's a good question for you. And
yeah, that is a great question. What I'll do is I'll share my screen again because this is actually the problem where we want to solve solve for. So like I'll give you the high level pitch of open source because like my answer is going to be use open source. But open source, like we're specifically trying to help companies find the best engineers. We want to scale teams, want to scale open source projects. The reason for companies is because companies will pay us eventually. But like this is true for maintainers. Like they don't have to pay for the full experience. We'll have sort of like a line drawn. But we've only been doing this for about 7 months. The history is that we wanted to provide insights in the open source project. So what we did is we built this platform, which is this insight platform where you get some high level insights into these custom dashboards for projects. So this one is just CNCF and committed projects. I've got a list of them here. If anybody wants to help us with this caching issue for images, there is an issue open. So would love your thoughts on there. We're doing some weird stuff that we need to clean up. But high level, I could see, okay, there's some activity happening in the project. This one's got a lot of activity. I would say a majority of the CNCF projects are pretty heavy on the activity. I'll show you why. Because we're only showing 1,000 contributions, and we only show up to 20 days of contributions when normally we would have stuff here. So this is pretty dense. There's a lot of stuff happening. But to get your PRs noticed, the thing that I would do is like be a part of the conversation or be your contributions noticed. It really depends what your end goal is. Like if you wanted to just be part of the community, like I'd probably end up joining their Discord or their IRC or whatever the conversation happens. Most projects that have passed that growth stage and are established projects, like pretty much every single one of these here, they have a community that they chat in. So my recommendation is chat there and be close to the maintainers and contributors. So that way, you're making sure you work on the right thing at the right time. A lot of times we get some random, we did get a random contribution for the search. So currently search, you have to search by having the actual name, but we want to have a type ahead search. So that was a good contribution that's not live yet. I don't know what I did there, but I did want to kind of highlight what our next, like the reason why I'm saying this, I'm showing open source is because what we're going to be shipping in the next week or so is the idea of doing highlights of your contribution. So like it's one thing of you've done the work, it got merged, but the storytelling usually is the thing that sort of falls off. And the best thing you could do is take your PR and write a blog post on how you did it. That would help so many people. Like, and this is the thing that I'm trying to get more people to do, just generally across the board. Because like if someone told me, hey, I solved this problem using this ecosystem or this library, I found the bug, here's how I fixed it. The door is so much wider when you can go through and read all these past experiences. So on the open source platform, we're going to have a section for highlights where you can just link in your PR and drop like a quick little paragraph or a sentence of like, this is what I did. What a great experience. There we go. And then the idea there is like, go ahead and share those highlights on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and the Discord. So yeah, we'd love everyone who's listening. We do have a newsletter that's actually all the way on the bottom. Oh, here we go. We'll keep you up to date if you want to follow externally. Like definitely subscribe so that way you can get access to that feature early. But obviously, maybe it's not obvious. Everything we're doing is open sourced. So if you want to see where highlights are, you can actually see specifically the new input highlight in our design system, which is pretty cool. And our roadmap's open source as well. So hopefully it helps Carlton. I honestly, we were going through like a big growth phase for open source. We had a whole nother project that we were building that we've kind of deprecated already to rebuild it in this new project. But our contributors were getting jobs through contributions to open source. So we had a person got hired at Sneak from a bunch of DevOps stuff they did for us. And then another person got hired for some front-end work at SRS over in North Carolina. And my recommendation is always take your PR, like literally take that link and then add it to your cover page or your cover letter. Because that's a story you could share, like with a lot of bootcamp grads, the folks I interact with. The hardest part is the showing that they can actually do the work and like have something to show for more than just like to-do apps and like bootcamp projects. And that's our audience. That's our community right now. It's a lot of bootcamp grads.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's only so many vanilla projects that you can do, and a lot of them actually don't just kind of showcase your abilities in a lot of ways. So I definitely like this idea of highlighting your contributions and your PRs. It kind of reminds me of Polywork, which is how I originally found you.
Yeah.
And how you can, showcase your work, whether it's a conference talk that you did or a blog post or a video that you put out. I think it does a better job of any of the social media platforms of highlighting like your actual portfolio. So I really like this feature.
Yeah, and big fan of Polywork. Like we wouldn't have been connected without Polywork. You'd found me. And like what Polywork is like, it's a bit broader where it's focused on like content creators. And I think, I don't know what their actual thesis is today. I think I could look it up pretty quickly. but I love Polywork, and I was doing this on Polywork pretty regularly. But the more and more I find myself on Polywork, I find that like the blog posts or this podcast that we're on is a better fit for Polywork. If you just want to find code contributions, um, that is a thing that we want to build a platform for that. And I think this it's very similar to like you mentioned your live streaming on Twitch. Like live coding on Twitch is pretty big as well, but it also it's a bit of a hurdle to get on Twitch. Like you have to kind of know the lingo. You got to know what chat interactions are. You got to build a community and point people to a Discord. And at the end of the day, like I think even live streaming, live coding on Twitch is like we definitely need like a developer only audience or platform because it's so broad that it's hard to grow community when it is that broad. And like we're hoping that if we start specifically for engineers trying to showcase their PRs, like that could be a niche that we end up growing and developing. And like the share button, hopefully we'll have a share to Polywork button as well in the future.
Yeah, there's so much good point about showcasing just issues and just PRs, because I think that's much different than a blog or anything that you're necessarily creating, and it may be incomplete. And also, I'd like to add that when you look at a PR, you're not necessarily, you don't have the context, right? So you don't have the ability to see the timeline of events. Like I'm reading on your screen, like you can say, I've been working on an open source project, came across this thing, I wanted to contribute to it, collaborated with a lot of different people. Those highlights are super important for anybody trying to look for new developers or anybody that's contributing. And that's a huge benefit that you don't necessarily see if you're just looking at GitHub, right?
Yeah, and it's the it's just that. So I saw Joshua mention just deciding what project contribute to is like 80% of the problem when trying to contribute. And this is like the hope there is that if when you see people make their contributions and tell their story, it's like, oh, I think I can approach this or I can get involved, because now it's like not a mystery of like how did you even learn, or it's like no, I was in the Discord. Someone mentioned there was a problem. Like, hey, I can solve that. Open the issue, open the PR. And then I shared it as a highlight. And like, obviously that's like, maybe it takes 2 or 3 weeks to get to that point, but I think it's the stories. Like it's maybe open source. It's like that saying, open source is the friends we make along the way. Like there's a journey to get to this highlight. And like, we want to be sharing these journeys over and over again and like making it approachable. Cause I think that's the other thing. It's like, everyone talks about getting open source, find good first issues, et cetera, et cetera. Like, what we did, so we built a couple different projects, and I'll share this one as well, which is hotopenSauce.pizza. We're going to integrate a lot of these features in our main platform, but this was like a project we had all this data on like what was trending in our community for open source projects, and that's basically what this is. They're all up and coming, mostly unknown projects. Like I don't know what the unwrapper is, but they're always going to be these projects about to hit their growth stage. So that's what this is. So I don't know what this is, but if I go into this this project, actually, the linking's going to be a little broken. It looks like I broke it a little bit. But anyway, the goal is and this is again open source. Like, would love to fix that flow. But the idea there is like I want to go find out whatever this unwrapper is. I'm going to go read about it. It seems to be trending here. Eventually, we'll have some sort of sorting for type of language and frameworks. Which is what the Insights platform does for us today. But these are just a bunch of up and coming. Like this one has 1,000 stars, so it seems like that one hit. It's already trending in the growth phase. But like 30 stars, 179. A lot of this stuff maybe you can't contribute to, but like I know Lucia, who's does developer experience. Like, oh, there's a cool Apache Kafka thing. Feel free to PR and add your own. Like, seems like this is an awesome list repo. Maybe not something you want to contribute to like code wise, but like there's some cool trending stuff that's happening here. And that's the sort of discovery. So like we're trying to solve the problem for Joshua of like, here's a list of projects up and coming. Eventually we'll be able to filter these by types and languages and stuff like that. But the one thing I did want to point out, if anybody's interested, would love, we're going to be shipping some new features for the profile screen. Ooh, that's a weird UI bug. I don't know why that's broken, but we'll fix that later. I think it's this should be full screen, but anyway, regardless, like inside the profile, we shipped this last week, and you'll be able to identify things that you're interested in. So we have limited interest today, but we'd love feedback on what else should be here.
Nice.
If you choose your interest, we'll be able to then recommend you projects that are trending or hot. So that way, instead of you trying to search of like, oh, I don't know what to do, like, hey, they just cut a new release on this Unwrapper. Like, would you like to check it out? It seems to be in your wheelhouse. And you start getting recommendations for projects to contribute to, which today doesn't exist. Like, there's a lot of open source comes with, you should already know what you want to contribute to. And it's unfortunate because not a lot of people know what to do with that. But if we can recommend stuff, we can recommend not only that, but we can also recommend, if you check this box, we're to ship another feature, which also similar to Polywork, request for collaboration. So if you're a maintainer and you're like, you know what, I need AI experts, anybody who's checked AI in this specific time zone. Like, time zones sometimes matter, sometimes it doesn't. But we just love to jump on a chat with people. Let's make that happen. We'll start just making your profile discoverable, so that way people can reach out to you directly.
Yeah. So you alluded to somebody like Josh who's trying to find which project to contribute to, and finding trending topics or trending projects, but also, are there any other use cases for, somebody coming to OpenSauce? Like, I'm just thinking, companies or.
Yeah. So the use case we have, and this is kind of outlined in our landing page. Our main use case is like getting companies to leverage OpenSauce to source developers to contribute to our projects. So the goal there for them, and this is, we had a conversation behind your head. You have our podcast running.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's Steve. Steve is one of the co-founders of Mux. So it's a video API for video, basically, is the sort of summary of what their product is. It's gone further than that, but essentially API for video. And he got started by building Video.js. Or before that, he built something before that. But Video.js is the thing that took. So it's just embedding video into the browser, which is like, it predates YouTube. So that becomes their funnel for sourcing really good candidates and engineers that care about video. So I mentioned that because I talked to another person on that same podcast, which is Impera, and Impera, which just inquired by, what was it? They were acquired by, here you go, Ankur.
Building your online business.
Oh, mute that. Gotta watch the ad. We're double ads today.
For the people listening, it's youtube.com/OpenSauce, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I don't know what that is, but skip trial, thanks. But what I'm getting at is that Ankur had did zero open source as a founder, went to college, built a company up to a Series A valuation, handful of engineers. They decided to open source a new tool, which was their machine learning to basically, the product itself looks at PDFs and identifies inputs, and they added some machine learning to make this work easier, and built it in a couple weekends and decided to open source it because it wasn't like their main product. It was just like a cool thing. Yeah. And what that was a funnel for people just to try the product. It was an open source example, basically. And these are a dime a dozen examples, any sort of front end interaction like Astro or React or Next.js. They have all these example repos. So it's very similar. It just happened to have machine learning. But what was interesting is, like, when he launched it, he ended up getting 1,000 stars in a week and doubling their customer acquisition funnel. So like before enterprise only, they were just paying for AdWords to get people funneled into the business and to use it. And just by open sourcing the example to get people excited to use it, it became another opportunity. So like going back to your question of like other use cases, like our main use case is these insight hubs. These insight hubs are a place where you can go and add your own projects. So if I'm like, hey, this is my team, whatever name you want to do, and then adding OpenSauce hot, which I do want to point out that this is an open issue. Like we want to have type ahead search here. So it's a bit painful to be able to have to type every single one, but I add to the repository, it goes on my list. And then if I wanted to, like what I did for KubeSkills, created a list for all the projects you had sent me up front. And that KubeSkills dashboard is actually, it's available and readable by anybody who wants to read it. So I think I had a version of it somewhere in a tab, but we'll get there. Yeah. Anyway,
I'll try to find that and put it in the chat. But yeah, that's super interesting. So I was thinking, I was kind of going down the road of, if I'm looking at this from a business perspective, and I also do want to talk about like what's the value in it for business. And I know for a fact that this is profitable, right, for your employees to be able to contribute to open source. And so that's kind of the road I want to go down now, which is, from if you're a manager, if you're a executive, if you're a CTO or CIO, how can we leverage this platform to maybe hire more developers, right? Or maybe just see what projects are hot.
Yeah, there's a different angle. So like I've talked to companies that, like, if you saw my insights pages, that those are literally all the demos I've been doing for companies. Think of like a company who has a bunch of examples. So one of the examples is like they have 50 plus SDKs to integrate with their platform. Their goal is basically keep those active. They want to see where people are contributing, to make sure things aren't stale. And we approach, actually, this is on the YouTube channel as well, around Bus Factor. So we have a video on our YouTube channel. It's literally called Bus Factor. And I didn't call out the actual company itself. Let's see, this one. I didn't call out the company itself, but when we talked to them, we had one project that it was funneling about $500 million worth of business to their product, like their bottom line. And they have 50 plus of these. So like they're making money through all of them. But I guess the game there was that when we presented it to them, they had this one SDK that had no contributions. Sorry, I'm messing this up. They had one contributor for the past 6 months for this one SDK. And it turned out that this person happened to have a startup that was integrated directly with this SDK, and it was in their best interest to get access to commit access to be able to keep the thing moving forward and the roadmap going. And then when I asked this team, I was like, hey, who's this person? They didn't really have an idea. So the thought there is like, one benefit is that you could at least know what's happening in open source for the purpose, and I'll have to close some of these tabs, but for the purpose of being able to, okay, if we only had one contributor and that this is Peter Good, like who is Peter Good? Why are they making all these contributions? And the idea there is that we could take Peter and his profile and be like, oh, Peter's in this time zone. This is his history. We'll eventually have more of a profile to be able to share to folks. But now there's an opportunity for that person, for me to go to Peter and be like, hey, you've done a good job with Prometheus. You had a big contribution to whatever this is. Do you want to come chat in our office hours? Or do you want to come to our conference? Like, there's an opportunity there to stay connected to the open source community, because at the end of the day, like, I think YC, the number was like almost 50% of the projects that are the companies that are in YC, this batch, have an open source angle. Like there's an open source component, or they started open source and built a company, but it's like 50%. And that number's going higher and higher. Like every company in the next couple of years will have some sort of open source component, because like one, it is free access to the community. Like free access, it obviously costs money to stand up a project and maintain it, but it's like it's also a funnel for hiring. So if you want to, like what AWS does, have a bunch of SDKs and CLIs, like their AWS heroes come directly from the contributions of the SDKs and CLIs. And the hero program is their MVP, like their ambassador program in particular. So like there's so much benefit in having an open source project, a sandbox, when it comes to interviewing, like being able to have a sandbox to start the interview process with. So like, here's our repo, clone the repo, do a thing, and then we can test your skill. Like having that repeatable process like becomes a really good avenue to showcase skills. And like we're also seeing a trend, more and more companies are doing open source first, so open source included. Our entire ecosystem, everything's open source except for the API layer. That's the one thing that we have behind a private repo right now. until we add security and stuff like that to it.
Yeah.
But now if you could see, for open source first companies, you could see who's contributing. Now it's like, oh, wow, they're a boss at doing this. Like maybe we should reach out, not for hiring, but maybe like for collaboration. Maybe there's a person we could talk to about the problems that we're stuck on. They've already been solved. And the beauty of that is like, I probably saw their highlight on OpenSauce. I would love to have a connection. So like now there's an opportunity where we can showcase skills, and you don't have to be an influencer to do it. And I think that's the challenge today is like most open source maintainers, they grow to a level where they're influential. I think Kelsey Hightower is a great example, like godfather of Kubernetes. He doesn't do any open source. And the reason for that is like, if he shows up at a project, like it's another project. Like it's now been blessed by Kelsey. And so he can't just have fun and do open source, but he's making room for other people to do that. And so there's opportunity for folks who don't want to speak at every conference, but just want to solve cool problems. There's a pathway that we're building to find the problems to solve or to create problems if you're in the tech debt. But that's, I don't know, I'm rambling a little bit, but very excited about the thing that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. I think a lot of people have that same excitement. And so you mentioned, this is a real opportunity for someone to get a job or to get noticed by a potential employer or somebody like AWS, Google, or Microsoft, or what have you. So with that, I think there's a lot of incentive to contribute to open source. And so I guess if I'm a contributor and I'm actively contributing, I'm doing all the things that we talked about, such as creating a post on my PRs and communicating in the message boards. What else can I do, I guess, to not to highlight shortcuts or anything, because I hate that. People are not going to become, you got to put in the work, right? So it's not trying to create shortcuts, but I just wonder if they do all these things that we mentioned so far, what other things can I look forward to in terms of contributing to open source? It can get you a job, but can it do other things as well?
Yeah, and I'd say in your contributions that you don't need to I would say don't overthink it, but also maybe think about what you're making contributions to. So like there's the big notion a couple years ago, Hacktoberfest had a Spantoberfest where people were doing at the lowest level like documentation, like adding white space to readmes and stuff like that. Yeah. And I think we've identified that there's an opportunity to fix that. And I think it's mostly been like or the awareness has kind of built. But I would say like the caveat, what I'm going to say is like don't do spam, basically. Like try to make valid contributions. We call this at least in open source, we call this typo hunters. Folks who specifically only make contributions that are typos, which is, it's cool. Like, take a README and throw it in the Grammarly and then find a bunch of typos and fix them. But is that helpful? Probably not, because at the end of the day, someone probably was going to get the context there. If you're going to fix typos, fix all the typos, make it all one PR of the entire documentation has now been fixed and the grammar has been lifted to the next level. Like that's a better contribution than like, oh, you forgot the E. So like most maintainers will just say, don't even bother with the typos, because like they're not going to get merged, because it's more annoying to start the release process on a markdown edit in a typo. But sorry, I trailed it off. What was the original question?
Yeah. So if I'm a contributor and I'm, I let's say I opened my first issue, I've made a blog about it, I've kind of broadcasted it to the world to try to get noticed. I'm on OpenSauce now, and I'm on the leaderboard and kind of doing all the things. I'm essentially, let's not beat around the bush here. Like I'm talking about getting paid. Like,
okay.
Like how do people, find other incentives like money? Money's a good incentive, right? To contribute.
Yeah, no, I would say like back like 9 years ago when I was getting into this, I got into the Ember.js community, and I was like not a front end dev, but I was trying to do JavaScript more. once that I did my second contribution. And what I noticed is a lot of the core team and a lot of the heaviest contributors were all consultants on Ember.js. So what they were doing is because they had the expertise that they leveled up, and like they built a framework. I used it, but they were consulting to the point where now LinkedIn, I don't know if they still use Ember.js, but they hired one of the co-creators of Ember.js. So I guess what I'm getting at is like, if you want to get paid, like specialize, like find out a thing that you could do well, and then ask people to pay you for that. So GitHub sponsors a really good pathway to do that. As long as it's available in your country. I think there's about 30 countries that GitHub sponsors works with. But the idea there is like, what we have is we have a really good release process, and that wasn't created by me. I kind of helped push it along forward and gave a bunch of ideas through GitHub Actions. But one contributor was like, hey, I could make this release work like butter. That would be something that I would probably pay for every project I did. I would pay this person who now they work full time for us now. So I am paying them for it. But if you went to every project and was like, hey, I can improve your release, let me know if you need help with this. I wouldn't go to like free open source projects for this. I'd probably go to companies and do this, because a lot of companies, they need the help and the support. And like, hey, I'm an expert on setting up APIs that are secure and manageable. Like whatever, like that's a very specific skill set. But whatever your specific skill set that you want to develop, like eventually get to the point where it's just like contracting. Like you have the skills, this share that. I will show one thing that we will be building next month as well to kind of really hammer this out. I was on the fence if I'll share this, but we have the idea, and this is all open source as well. So like you can literally see where we are with this. But on the profile, we'll have a collaborate button. And in that collaboration, you sort of provide a list of things that you're looking to collaborate. And like, this is you finding the person. So you found me on Polywork to be a guest on the podcast. But imagine if you're like, hey, I want to stand up a quick landing page built in Astro with a little bit of, animation stuff happening. Like, here's my budget. Would you like to do it? Yes or no, accept or ignore. And that's the sort of ecosystem we're going to eventually build, which is getting developers paid for the work that they can do, or the work that they want to do. So this is more of just ideation at the moment. But the idea is that companies could contract to hire, specifically on one-off projects, to test out folks before they go full on, hey, I'm going to hire you, and we're going to roll the dice and take a chance.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm looking forward to that feature. I think that's a really important point to bring up, because the very nature of contributing is free. It's a lot of people, and I would argue that it's a lot of work by a lot of people, very smart people who are grossly underpaid, giving their free time, and really we're all kind of standing on our shoulders to a certain extent to benefit from a lot of these projects. And so I want to point out just the avenues to which we can maybe highlight the work of another person who's in that situation, right? Who's really putting in the work and doing their quality commits, and really people who deserve to be held up, right? And then also, for other people, or for maybe those people as well who are, kind of putting in the work but not seeing any returns. I think it's important to highlight that.
Yeah. And like we have, so like if I take a step back and I explain open source in the simplest terms, like we want to bring LinkedIn to GitHub, essentially. And that's like, everyone thought this was going to happen at GitHub. I was working at GitHub and was like, oh, wow, GitHub's going to turn to LinkedIn. And then we shipped this feature. I helped on the sort of storytelling around this feature that got shipped. It launched at Codeland, which is like a early dev conference. And the feature itself is like the GitHub profile README. Amazing feature. It's just simple markdown editing. You can add whatever you want here. Most people put a bio of like, hey, I used to do this, and now I'm working at this, looking for roles doing that. I instead launched a MySpace page, which is powered by GitHub Actions. So here's my top 8. But I mentioned this because I think this is a great, like everyone thought that, okay, GitHub's now going to go and like recruiter's going to hit you up on GitHub now, and like you can't DM on GitHub or anything like that. So you're fine, you're good. But what I want to do is lean into that. So like bringing that experience of like, I want to source 100 Python developers in Wichita, Kansas, because I'm going to host an event. Like, how do I reach out to folks that like Python enough that they're contributing and want to be involved? And what we want to do with OpenSauce is make that easier. So I could probably go down the list of a bunch of Figma designs of everything we have work in progress. But I encourage everyone who's listening, definitely follow our open source repo, our roadmap. Would love everyone here to connect with us, connect your GitHub profile so that we can keep you up to date on what we're shipping. And then we use our Discord for feedback, because I think there's a lot to be done and a lot of things we can make good within the open source ecosystem. And what I see a lot of is like people start a company and they just don't make that connection to the community, make that connection to their users. And like we're doing the opposite. Like we started with the Discord first, then we built a project. So happy to have folks who are interested in finding projects to look for. If it's not working for you, like obviously today OpenSauce is not perfect for everyone, but there's an opportunity to improve that. And it's a one issue opened away. So if you're like, hey, I have an idea, open the issue and like we'll have a discussion around it.
Nice. That's a good approach, I think. So people can go to opensauce.pizza and click on the connect with GitHub in the upper right hand corner there, and they can join for free and start getting their stuff noticed. Yeah, adding their projects and such.
Yeah, and we would love feedback on things like the insights. So like if we look at the insights of all of JavaScript, we have high level insights of like, okay, how many PRs are labeled versus unlabeled? How many things have been merged? The number of contributors. Like this is all stuff that you can do on your project level as you create your own pages. So if you're interested, create a page, give us feedback on what you would like to see, because all that stuff gets implemented. It gets added to a list and a roadmap. We have a designer we've been working with as well to get stuff prototyped, like those wireframes I've been showing. But like this only works by having people chat with us and talk, and like we grow the community, and we want to be this open source first community platform for folks. So yeah, definitely please connect and let us know what you want to see. I think that's something that comes up a lot is the fact that our default is JavaScript, and not everyone wants to see JavaScript stuff. So this button will eventually be a drop down to pick other things, other topics and things and interests that you're interested in seeing.
Yeah, so I think that's a good segue to go over to the dashboard that you generously created for us, and so we can highlight some of the CNCF projects that are hot right now. These are all graduated projects, so they're seeing a lot of traction today. Maybe look at some incubator projects as well, to going back to what we talked about before with contributing to some of the smaller projects. But yeah, go to insights.opensauce.pages/bdougie/94/dashboard. I think this is
a mouthful.
Yeah, I should have created a short link for that, but yeah, it'll be in the chat there, so you can hopefully just copy and paste. But yeah, so I just wanted to focus on CNCF. And by the way, I also wanted to for people who haven't yet got into the CNCF Slack, this is kind of the community. It's the Discord equivalent, so everybody knows Slack, right? So you can go in there and find your channel that pertains to whatever project you're contributing to, whatever, Prometheus, etcd, Helm, whatever, and you can start to ask people questions, right? I think that's if you're just starting out, I think that's the best way to go. I think you said that before, Brian, where reaching out to people and saying like, how can I best be helpful, or what can I do to help, I think is the best approach there.
Yeah, 100%. And like today, what we have is you can see what work's been done. We don't have like a recommendation engine yet to say, okay, these are the things you could maybe contribute to, or these are projects that are trending. But like we want to get there, and the only way to get there is just by getting some feedback and thoughts from folks. So, which is why we have our Discord, which is discord.dg/opensauce. It's Open Sauce is pretty unique name, so it's super easy to Google or scroll down to the bottom of the page and click the big old Discord button.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's super important to have that community. I know that's one of my goals with Cube Skills is to create that community and highlight some of the people who are contributing, and also get to the point where people are bringing other people with them, or holding other people up, and so that power of community is in my opinion very understated and very underrated. I think if you join a community, there's an experience there, right? Where, like, if you're on your own and just doing this on your own, it's it could, you could fizzle out, or can you speak to any like positive experiences that you've had in communities in your past 10, 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the Odin project. That was like my first developer community that I joined, and I think a lot of those folks, like, I still cross paths with. Like, there's one person who was working for a blockchain company out here in San Francisco, and they're the one. Actually, that was the person who created the Odin project. But like time and time again, like, I keep running into people who I cross paths with, like, years ago in other communities. Like Code Newbie is another one that I was really heavily involved in early days, and that community is like birthed so many new devs and people that are established in the industry. Like, I went all the way up to director at GitHub, was able to work at early stage startups like Netlify, and those interactions is really where I sort of cut my teeth, but also got mentorship and got stability. It's sort of like, oh man, I don't think I could solve these error messages. Where can I go? And the community was always a place that I would do that for. And I remember specifically when I was writing Go, at Netlify. So I was a full stack dev first. Then I became a front end engineer because no one else was writing JavaScript. And then I became DevRel, developer experience, at Netlify. And within 2 years, it was like a fast, okay, this is your job now. And that's startups in a nutshell. But I remember my trick for getting my Stack Overflow questions answered is I write up a Stack Overflow question, and I'd go to the Golang Slack and be like, hey, I've got a question. I wrote it in the Stack Overflow. If anybody has time to take a look, let me know, give me feedback. And like, Stack Overflow is like already daunting as it is. Mm-hmm. But when you go with, like, when you ask a question in a place that could be like, the answer could be there forever in SEO world, people appreciate that. And like, it's like, for whatever reason, sometimes it's just missed that I could go DM somebody on Slack or Discord and be like, oh, I have a problem. But that's like the worst thing you can do. The best thing you do is like go in a public channel and ask the question, so that way everyone else stuck on that same problem benefits. Yeah. An even better thing is go to a public linkable place like a forum or Stack Overflow, ask the question there, and link it back to the Discord or Slack. And I think my career, I don't think I would be where I'm at today if I didn't do that. The last process of just making it searchable, that people can find it after me, and like just be helpful. And that's like the thing that I started this conversation with about providing value. Like, that value that you create by getting a question out there that can be searchable and doesn't have to be asked every single time. Like, once a week, someone asks the same question. I wish we would just write this down or put it in the docs. Like, that's an opportunity to be like, I've seen this asked like 3 times. Maybe I can create a video on it, or maybe I can create an answer on Stack Overflow.
Yeah, so amazing there. Putting your stuff out there in public, I can speak to this as well, is so beneficial for so many reasons. You have the accountability aspect of it, where you're putting yourself out there and you're like, I have this problem, or I have this thing, I am now committed to action, sort of thing. And then you have the, people helping you and that learning experience that you get from people who are smarter than you and who can or smarter in those particular areas. And then you also have those, by demonstrating that you can do that, you show that maybe other people have that same problem and maybe we're afraid to ask, and then also, by putting yourself up there, you're creating that culture of like it's okay to ask those questions, right? Because I've been a part of a lot of communities where you post something and then crickets, and that's a little bit discouraging. But then on the other hand, on the other side of it, you have a lot of praise and a lot of traffic and a lot of like thank yous and things that lift you up and make you feel good about asking that particular question. And then you get also good at asking questions, right? That's really the whole thing, is asking good questions is integral to learning and growing. And yeah, I mean, I could talk all day about this, but it's just so the power of community is really, like I said, underrated. So I really want to talk about, so we have, a lot of our members and a lot of people watching probably are associated with or familiar with CNCF. And so if you go to CNCF, if you look at their project board or the CNCF roadmap, you'll see, I don't know, hundreds of different projects. And so it can be pretty daunting, right? And we highlighted some with the dashboard that you created for us. So Prometheus is a big one, etcd, Helm, even Kubernetes community. And we have different SIGs that SIG stands for special interest groups, which you can get involved with. So where there's SIG security, SIG storage, SIG API. So there's even within Kubernetes, there's so much to choose from in terms of making your first contribution. But yeah, getting involved in those communities is definitely a good first step in seeing where you can contribute. And I think another thing I'd like to highlight is, if a lot of people don't know, what to say or what to do first in terms of starting those conversations or getting the ball rolling. But I would say, I think approach it with curiosity. I think a lot of people have, like, the way not to do it, and maybe you can speak to this, Brian, is like the way not to do it is to go in there and being like, why hasn't somebody fixed this, or why is this
Yeah.
like this? Or demanding demanding action and making these demands and really being quite rude. So I would approach it with curiosity and approach it with like you're talking to a real human, right? Because if we're opening our PR and we're making comments on it, I think you get unfamiliar with the fact that there's a human on the other side of it.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like, we do forget that there's a human, and it's like there's always the classic issue of like, oh, I'm going to stop using this project because this bug has been open for 2 years, and why hasn't someone closed this or fixed it? And the answer, especially in open source, the question I have is like, why haven't you fixed it? Like if you're really invested in it, and it's a snarky way to go back on that. Like obviously maybe that person has have the skills to jump in or the knowledge to jump in and fix that. But I think I had a lot of opportunity at GitHub, talking to a lot of maintainers that have been burnt out and just sort of walked away from the projects or handed the keys over to somebody else. And like someone that comes to mind is there was a project I think called Floam, and it got during 2020. It was kind of like the Rome research, or the sort of like knowledge base, sort of histogram. I don't know how to explain that, but it was like they were big, kind of like a Notion, and it got really big really quick. And the maintainer was just like, I actually like building stuff. I don't want to maintain anything. Like I built this for me. It solved my problem, and it got picked up on Hacker News and stuff like that, and got huge. And like I don't want to do this anymore. So he made the decision to like hand it over to somebody else and be like, you maintain this, like become famous, whatever. I'm gonna walk away. And it's actually a pretty common story for a lot of projects where people just like, I'm here to write code. I'm not here to build a company, not here to build a community. Just wanted to share a cool thing. And I think that I think I respect that people know where their limitation is, and they don't like sort of get drawn into the notoriety or the fame of having a popular project. But with that being said, you do when your project hits that growth stage and inflection point, you do invite a lot of people who don't know about the story of how it came. Like even with open source, like 7 months in, we have tech debt on a brand new project that's less than a year old. And it's because we thought we were going to build it this way. We didn't. We're going to fix that other stuff eventually, but we also want to build a new thing too. And people come in later on and be like, "This is weird. Why is this like this?" It's like, "Oh well, let me sit down and tell you a story of how we thought this thing was going to work the first time." And it turns out that wasn't the path, and we found the easier way. But we had to like walk away and leave that sort of dangling over there. And like, there's like dragons all through our API and our backend for that same reason, because like you got to move fast. And like because we have a sort of like we'll be VC back soon, but like we have angel investment to work on this. Like, oh, we can accelerate, we can build a team, and that's what we've been doing so far. But definitely don't walk into a project and be like, why is this not fixed, or why is this so dumb? Like, why aren't you? And at Netlify, we had that same thing, which was we were building GitHub Pages as pretty much a venture-backed startup, and GitHub Pages is a free product. In the terms and conditions, you can't actually build commercial products on GitHub Pages. They prefer you not to, mainly because they don't want to get all that traffic and have to do support and stuff like that. So Netlify exists for that reason. But a lot of people don't realize that, or at the time in 2014, 2015, people were running up, like they were building servers in their kitchen to host their websites. And it was pretty much, I don't know if you remember those days, but like it was pretty much the norm. It's like you just set up your own server and you're good. Like, why would you do that? Why would you let Netlify do that for you? And here we are today, and people are letting Netlify do that for them.
Yeah, it's so crazy. We've come a long way.
Yeah, and we're still going. Like it's still like now it's like the whole AI ChatGPT. Like, do I need to learn how to code? And yes, like maybe you should definitely learn some skills so you're knowledgeable. But now you have all these you want to build a web app, you use like Bubble or Webflow, and not even touch the code. It's just like I just want this website to work. And I feel like we're full circle because my first interaction was like Dreamweaver. Like I was building Dreamweaver sites years ago in high school actually. And I thought that was amazing. Like I don't have to write code, and I can like build my websites, also MySpace. Like I didn't have to know much. I could just make it work. It's like, why would you need anything more than that? And here we are, like now 15, 20 years later. And we needed more.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, I think some of the don't do's are, going back to what we talked about with opening quality PRs. I forgot I was going to mention. I used to have a boss who would have like this event each month where he would highlight all the employees all the developers and engineers who contributed the most PRs. And like we were talking about before, it's like it's totally not the way to go about it, just because people will game the system, right? When you put something out there like that, like an incentive to get the most of something, people will take advantage, and that's so quality over quantity in terms of number of PRs that you're opening. And then also remember that there are humans on the other side of those PRs. There are passionate individuals who are creating these projects with their own money, with their own passion and heart. And so to come into any situation where you're contributing to a project and calling out people for doing things wrong, and that's definitely a not do. A to do, like we talked about at the beginning, is start small in terms of making a small contribution, getting involved with community, getting awareness around like what you can contribute to, and how can you put your best foot forward, both in terms of making small contribution first. So start small there, but also start small in terms of the company that you're contributing to, or the project that you're contributing to, I should say, and make sure you're making the most difference. And then you can go on to like we talked about before, with contributing to projects that are associated with companies so that you can get noticed. And obviously, I'm going to put up opensauce.pizza again to connect. And sounds like you have some awesome features coming down the pipe. So we're really excited about that and getting people noticed, and adding comments and adding all these intricacies to get people noticed and to help people with their contributing journey. So that's really cool. I just want to shout out again, these awesome Black developers. It's Black History Month, so I want to highlight these awesome people who are making a difference in the community with their talks and blog posts, and really giving their heart and soul to sharing what they know. And I think we could learn a lot from them. And then, we talked about the blog, which you can go and you just created a blog, you said, Brian, about, how do I contribute to open source if I'm a beginner, and how to get involved in general, which is very important. And then we talked about firsttimersonly.com. Go to www.firsttimersonly.com to contribute to, like, if you're just starting out, contribute your first PR ever. That would be really cool to get that on your on your skill on your skill board, or whatever you have at that you're measuring your success there, or measuring your progress. Check out OpenSauced on YouTube, youtube.com/OpenSauced. And what else? Did I miss anything? Brian, how can we, besides going to opensauce.pizza, obviously, how else can we follow you and see what you got going on?
Yeah. I mean, definitely hit me up on Twitter, BWO. I hang out in the Discord quite often, so happy to answer questions, being the community there. And other than that, I think you mentioned Polywork. I'm on Polywork, so if anybody wants to reach out to have me on their podcast and have conversations, just definitely hit me up there. And with that, I mean, I would just say stay saucy, and we'll definitely find you.
Awesome. Appreciate your time today, Brian. I love what you're doing for the community, and this project is going to take off. Looking forward to seeing all your future success.
Cool. Sounds great.
All right. You have a good rest of your day.
Thanks.
All right. Bye, everybody.